Hello, everyone, and welcome to the last major piece of the Alternate Cooking and Cooling Appendix A and B mini video series. This mini video series is brought to you by AAMP's Outreach. I am Abbey Davidson, and I will be walking you through the requirements of Appendix A and B and alternate support for certain products. I would like to extend a special thank you to Dr. Jonathan Campbell for his knowledge and expertise as we've compiled this presentation. As I walk you through the presentation, if you have any questions, please make sure to write them down, and you can contact myself at abby@amp.com or Nelson Gatos, my outreach counterpart, at nelson@amp.com. So the reason behind this mini video series is to aid processors in identifying alternate support for their processes if it's needed, other than the 2021 Appendix A and B. We've discussed many different product types in the video series, and now we're going to focus on the required reassessments and validations of HACCP plans. We'll walk through the regulations and discuss how to properly implement these changes. As we well know by now, by December 14th of this year, the 1999 versions and the 2017 versions of Appendix A and B will no longer be allowed to be used as support in food safety plans. And once the support documents are changed, food safety plans will most likely have to go through a new validation period as well. On this subject, though, if a processor is using any of the scientific gaps outlined in Appendix A or B 2021 that reference the 1999 version, they're allowed to do so. As we are in video 5, we wanted to take the time to highlight the product types already discussed. The products listed on this screen have been discussed in the previous videos in this series. These videos are posted to AAMP's YouTube page as well as AAMP's website. Please reach out to anyone at the AAMP staff if you need assistance finding these videos. Okay, here we go. Validation. So 9 CFR 417.4A1 is the regulatory reference for validation. It reads as follows. Upon completion of the hazard analysis and development of the HACCP plan, the establishment shall conduct activities designed to determine that the HACCP plan is functioning as intended. During this HACCP plan validation period, the establishment shall repeatedly test the adequacy of the CCPs, critical limits, monitoring and record-keeping procedures, and corrective actions set forth in the HACCP plan. Validation also encompasses reviews of the records themselves, routinely generated by the HACCP system in the context of other validation activities. We will discuss this in broken down components on later slides. There are a lot of different aspects of this regulation that we will be sure to need to meet. So when we discuss validation, there are two parts. There is the design aspect, and then there's the execution aspect. So with the design aspect, the scientific or technical support gathered, which is the expert advice from processing authorities, scientific or technical data, peer-reviewed journal articles, pathogen modeling programs, or other information demonstrating that implemented control measures can adequately prevent, reduce, or eliminate specific hazards are required. The second part of validation is the execution part, which is the in-plant validation data. So this includes in-plant observations, measurements, microbiological test results, or other information demonstrating that control measures in the HACCP system can perform as expected within a particular establishment to achieve the intended food safety objective. So remember that both of these requirements, the design and the execution, need to be kept on file for the life of the plan. Okay, so as far as the design aspect, listed on the screen here are guidance on what the scientific or technical support should entail, and also examples of different types of support options. So for scientific or technical support, processors need to make sure that the support closely matches the process, and the support also needs to demonstrate how the hazards are identified, eliminated, or reduced to safe levels. The different types of support options may include what's seen on the screen here, for example, the 2014 Jerky Compliance Guideline, as well as scientific studies, advice from processing authorities, challenge studies, pathogen modeling programs, and others. So now that we've just gone over the design, let's talk execution, which is, of course, the second part of validation. This is typically your records and any other supporting data, like test results. So direct observations, CCP records, SSOP records, etc., may all be part of the validation execution. So to meet the execution part of validation, a processor must first implement the critical operational parameters in the actual production process, identify at least one product from each HACCP category for which to gather in-plant validation, collect in-plant data demonstrating effectiveness of implementation, and 4, the last one, is to analyze the data to determine whether the critical parameters are being implemented effectively. This screenshot on this screen is from FSIS's compliance guideline on validation. This is a pretty important concept, so let's read it. If an establishment is using the scientific support as support for the development of a CCP and its critical limits to prevent, reduce, or eliminate a hazard identified as reasonably likely to occur, the establishment should incorporate all of the critical operational parameters into the critical limits of the CCP. An establishment may determine, however, based on its decision-making, that some of the parameters can be monitored on an ongoing basis as part of a prerequisite program. An establishment may also determine that it only needs to ensure some of the critical operational parameters are implemented consistent with the support during the initial validation period. So this is items like spatial configuration, equipment type to the extent that it affects other parameters, or that the ingredient formulation does not change. These parameters should be included in a decision-making document, but they do not need to be monitored after the 90 days of initial validation unless there is a significant change. So basically what this is saying is if you identify operating parameters in your scientific support that are controlled by a GMP or a prerequisite, that's great, that works. So let's say that you have a prerequisite for processing schedules for snack sticks. If this procedure identifies that the come-up time for the product never sits between 50 degrees to 130 degrees for more than 6 hours, then the come-up time would not need to be a critical limit monitored in your HACCP plan. Okay, so now that we've discussed validation and its two main components, let's move on to the next steps, which would be a reassessment. As you are updating your support from the 1999 versions of Appendix A or B to a different support, you're actually completing a reassessment at that time. In 9 CFR 417.4 A3, it states, every establishment shall reassess the adequacy of the HACCP plan at least annually, and whenever any changes occur that could affect the hazard analysis or alter the HACCP plan. Such changes may include, but are not limited to, changes in raw materials or the source of raw materials, product formulation changes, slaughter or processing method or system changes, production volume changes, personnel changes, packaging changes, finished product distribution system changes, or the intended use or consumers of the finished product changes. The reassessment shall be performed by an individual trained in accordance with 417.7 of this part. The HACCP plan shall be modified immediately whenever a reassessment reveals that the plan no longer meets the requirements of 417.2C of this part. Each establishment must make a record of each reassessment required by paragraph A3I of this section and must document the reasons for any changes to the HACCP plan based on the reassessment, or the reasons for not changing the HACCP plan based on the reassessment. For annual reassessments, if the establishment determines that no changes are needed to its HACCP plan, it is not required to document the basis for this determination. So there's two important parts to the regulations that I just read. If you complete a reassessment in 2023, you do not have to complete your next reassessment until the end of 2024, for example. Also, all records of reassessments must be maintained on file at the plant. As far as validation and execution, we're talking about record keeping now. So the requirement for validation for small and very small establishments is that we need to collect data for at least 13 days of production within the initial 90 days of the HACCP plan implementation. If a processor does not operate within that HACCP plan for 13 days of the initial 90, A request for extension would need to be sent to the district for further time to collect data. Additionally, for record keeping, we want to make sure to keep on file your supporting documents, the minimum of 13 days of production records, a summary of your decision-making document for validation review, and any changes that have been made listed out, signed, and dated. It's also recommended to make copies and keep all of your validation information together for easy access. So one important thing to note with this Appendix A and B update is if the parameters that you've been using as support do not change, there is no need to go through the whole validation process again. And some final suggestions to think about during validation period are listed on this slide. So you may want to identify locations of where temperatures are taken, for example, the back wall of a cooler, a cold spot in a smokehouse, etc. Once the validation period is over, you do not have to keep addressing these if they don't change. And also, we want to make sure that you document your validation review. So what we're looking for is a summary of why your HASTA system is functioning as it should, with a review of dates and records and all the other information that goes into that plan. Shown on this slide are just examples of forms we recommend incorporating into your documentation as part of the review and revalidation, and many of these should be on site on the AAMP's website for those members that have access. And with that, we conclude the Appendix A and B mini video series. If you have any questions, please reach out to AAMP staff. Thank you.